from all the readers tonight. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of it. I've been to a lot of APAture events in the past, and so it feels really special to be here as the featured artist this year. And I'm just so grateful and in awe of Kearney Street Workshop and all the incredible work they do in making a space and a home for all of us. So thank you. I'm going to read a little bit from my first book first. It's called House A. It's a book about the tones and textures of immigrant home building and how history and dislocation and migration sort of gets inscribed onto the home in really shadowy and subtle ways. Sorry, I just totally, my mind went blank. This is also my first reading after having a baby, so. Forgive me if I'm a little absent-minded. I'm also really sleepy right now. I'm going to start with some parts that I don't actually read from a lot. So this is two fragments from the middle section, which is a long poem called House A, Geometry B. And it's kind of an incantational mapping of the book's topography, thinking about how a cosmology of home is imprinted on the body and becomes a map that we internalize from childhood. Also, the sections in this accrete by, the headings are alphabet letters, so I'm going to read D and E, just a couple sections. D. A dream is slightly off-center if this rock is where we place our heel to pivot. In sleep, a dream spreads until it is a sea of points and none of reference. If we could construct, say, a physical manifestation of an interior state, where in the space we take these angles, fill it with air, and watch it hang from the ceiling. Bird, shell, dry hibiscus. Let us pretend it is a loose limbed structure rather than something with a surface no shadow can touch. Enumerated imprecision, like counting the way an echo divides into lights and breaks. For the house is physically inscribed on our bodies, a diagram of the functions of inhabiting that house. To map, to constellate, to excavate. A blueprint for this mythos. A house is a map we unfold carefully, lest our breath is caught in the center ridge. E. We build a house to locate ourselves. A body lay in the house, a body lay slant in the house. Say the word nest, and they thought I meant child. Inside the house, I look for smaller houses. Structural beams of the kitchen table, canopy of wounded quilts, jar for the shell, jar for the birds, jar for the dry hibiscus. Anthropology of house. A is for the space between two slopes, the weathering of the roof against outside weather. Angle is the particular incline to reflect a particular view, as in, here is the baseline, here is the position along which you travel. Weather, the shape of the atmosphere, the side from which the wind is blowing. Extracts, house, body, architecture. I'm gonna put this down. Okay, and then I'm going to read just a few poems from the first section, which is the main section, and it's called Letters to Mao, and these are epistolary prose poems addressed to Mao Zedong. Dear Mao, stitched across my sleeping bag in thin silver lines is a contour map, which you may very well call belonging and unbelonging, since it resembles the ocean's own migratory movements or the spreading of constellations across a dark chart. I like to lie in it and pretend it is enveloping me. For if the world drowsy were to be washed in a sheen, perhaps you would all have some intuitive knowledge of the immigrant body, and we do at times, conscious of the ins and outs of how history holds us, or the ways we negotiate the space outside our bodies, noticing where and how we do not cohere. What, after all, does the body know? The windblown trees at the edge of the cliff are going to fall into the sea, so we must tie them down, attach them to buoys so they may float indeterminately. In stories my family kept reading at bedtime, wandering was a punishment, and we were instructed to pity the immigrant, the foreigner, the stranger. But what if the absence of a point of reference is not something to be lamented, but a structural foundation on which to build a house we fill with water? Yes, this is my family name. Yes, there is a haze between the child of the West and the child who identifies with the sea. Dear Mao, for we each live within our own language, some more literally than others, and mine is fractured into categories of intimate or functional, hard-pressed or textured, but never something without knots and gaps. If I could take a shadow and sew it to another until it formed a roof above my head. My brother napping on the couch in his winter jacket, I in the next room murmuring imaginary happenings to myself as the angle of the sun caught the ascending dust. Outside, my father put up wooden beams around our plants, sanding the logs until they made a satisfying sound against the rubber of my shoe. Dear Mao, if a sleeping bird were to dream, would it dream of icebergs, rocky cliffs, humid ponds? Or would it recall the feeling of winter settling in its tiny bones, reminding it just how wide the sky is across? For I can assemble a list of the ways we build: ranch-style house, colonial house, brick house, wooden gray slats. But we will never remember exactly how we began. Estrangement from what is a question you will never answer. Standing there on a dirt path heading towards the waves, a sudden rush of birds from the bushes might sound like mottled thunder. Dear immigrant, the anthropologist begins, as if this were a language where I am falling, where I am always falling asleep. So the book has a lot to do with redefining dislocation as a kind of location, and really thinking about the porousness of history and home. There's a third section, which I'm not going to read from, and they consist of image text poems called How to Build an American Home. So if you're curious, you can just sort of look through the book later. It's got some visuals. Okay, but I'm going to read from my most recent book, which is a really different project. It sort of still feels like a strange book to me. It's called Moon, Letters, Maps, Poems. I've got some visuals, which I'm going to try to make sure I can. Okay, it says it's connected. What did I want to tell you about this book? So it is part myth, part memoir, part poetry. It writes into the voices and stories of various women in Chinese mythologies. And it does this in a way that's, the undercurrent is sort of to tell a more personal narrative throughout the arc of the book. The folktales, the main one that it focuses on is that of Cheng, the Lady in the Moon. If you don't know this folktale, it's about a woman who begins on Earth, and she takes 2 pills or elixirs of immortality, which were actually gifted to her husband, the heroic archer. And her punishment is to float to the moon and sort of remain there for eternity as a kind of captive, leaving her husband on Earth. There's also the folktale of Niwa, which is about the girl creator of the world and of humanity, usually after a flood or a kind of calamity. There's the Snake Sisters, which is about these sort of spirit creatures that undergo animal transformations between snake and human. And then there's goddess Tianho, who is the goddess of the heavens and goddess of the sea. If you were to ask me what the book is about, I would have a hard time telling you, but I would say a couple things. One is that it's sort of about the need to unbuild in order to rebuild, and I think about this in terms of storytelling as much as self and home and world. And it's also about the feminine monstrous, thinking about feminine identity and selfhood and the importance of interior wilderness. So basically, when I write, I often collect images as kind of companions. So I thought it'd be interesting to bring these in as kind of accompaniments to the reading. Sometimes there's an accidental meaning making that happens in that space between image and text, which I'm interested in. So we'll allow that to maybe happen tonight. So I think you just need to click through between each poem. Yeah. Thanks, Jason. Okay, so I'm going to start with Biography of Women in the Sea, which is a section in which I'm interweaving the different folktales. Nirwa. And in between there was a moment, before the waters had receded completely, but no longer the world a massive sea, when nothing was as it should be. Mountain summits partly recovered, but newly interpreted in a state of suspended turmoil. Beached land animals, sea creatures renamed as broken pebbles on the basin floor, electrical lines now entrenched roots in the trees, the redwoods a swamp, the desert a beach, and everything half see-through in a humid sheen. The moment was sheathed in tenuous moisture. Rather than sewing up a heavenly hole, rather than gathering earth, grass, and willows to weave a dam, she places one foot on blurry ground, and the other is unseen. What did she expect, her body transfixed, her organs brimming, caught in the upturned fibers of an ancient tree? She stills her breath, a feverish hum. This is how the earth comes unsettled. It was the old objects of the world, now drained, brief and eternal standstill of a half-sunk world, half-rebirthed. Tang-e. For as long as the stories do not seem to align in an orderly manner, as long as such lost light sources make their way into the spinning crevices of her lungs, she will continue to ask herself, how does one make a habitation of it? What is the relationship between a woman's fragments and her desire for wholeness? What does a body know better when it is alone? It radiates in multiple directions and cannot be caught in a fistful. She collects postcards of abandoned churches, illegal housing structures, stormed huge temples. She takes photographs of burning coils dangling from the ceiling and pays homage to the oldest tree in the village on which wishes hang in pink string and plastic oranges. We lay down roots, and then we find the terrain has cracks, like skytop branches of a dark manzanita. For in a world where boundaries are slowly slipping, we begin with a map of the body in motion. Goddess Tin Hao. I was always afraid, she will say to them, her garments weighted with moisture, leaking damp shadows on the ground. Salt flakes off her skin like fish scales. They will offer her oranges, peaches, bowls of rice. Then to herself as she turns away and slips a round fruit into her pocket, like a recitation of childhood rhymes or plaintive prayer. When the rains recede, all that is left are women in their homes, women in their bodies, women in their aloneness. Snake Sisters. So we built a house in the woods. So we gathered twigs, bamboo, hemp. So we stitched a quilt from my dress, her night sleeve, flowers and cotton, and hung it down from a tree. So we stuck this rock here and said, do not move, little Ruth. So we pulled some twine and made a braid. So we laid out lines of sticks and sprigs. So we wound it under and over again. So we tied it all together. We tied it all in a gather and propped it up for a wall. So the woods were damp, muddy leaves, and the trees were coarse and musk. So she said to tether this plastic bag, a wear for the weather, some string and a hook. We took long strands and lay out a grid, a knot at the node, and okay, a beetle nut. Figure 1 is a vessel made of black hair and bark. If I knit and form tiny baskets, pine cones, hives, will you hang them on the wall? I said an array of new-colored structures. These structures of wildness curved into my hand. So I said, the body is a stranger. There is always something hidden. We are haunted by the surfaces we know are there. And then I'm going to read a sequence of persona poems. These are called The Voice of the Lady in the Moon. Some mornings when I wake, I know that in my sleep I have been weaving a net around my body, like fish hefted in from ocean waves, or a way to catch a falling starling. I never wanted a world clear as ether. Instead, I wanted a faraway sky to press my body up against, a boundary ever to push away. On the stairs as I made my way down to the ground, I saw that there were moths of all sizes stuck to the wall, small and large, but always flat, as if cut carefully from an old paper bag. All day I kept hearing metaphors: migrating salmon, nocturnal tides, the return of planetary bodies. When I say moon, I almost never mean the moon. When I say moon, I mean the light of the sky is about to disappear behind the beached ocean, and I cannot hold it anymore. It is spilling between my fingers. When I say to you it is a strange moon day, you should know I mean the unsettling of our underbellies, strewn across such rigorous comings and goings. If I were more careful, the dishes would not be chipped, the tub not a discolored rust. At various times during the day, I find the light too meager, too hesitant, or otherwise possessed. I move from room to room as if to monitor my body's absorption of external particles, but really I am drawn to what I cannot name, the slant of life, light, a brief home for this patch of skin. Outside, I can see clusters of sturdy green leaves emerging from the underground, trembling and waving recklessly as if prickled by a self-assured wind. Underwater, their movements would resemble swimming. If he eclipses me in my own house, if he haunts my movement like a shadow to ground an unknown desire, if he notices habitual wounds, household failures, but says nothing, then I will plant a garden of creeping winter, walking onion, orris root, their stalks able to reach sky-shaped distances, their leaves unafraid to impress on the skin. I am grateful for the odd, unruly pine, its limbs so sprawling it cannot be held by a metal wire. I am grateful for tree bark that flakes into moths, for dandelion spores that swim upward straight through earthly branches, never caught, never landing. Until one night in my sleep, I followed the intruder home. As if to admit a part of my body lived there, a small circular table, the sound of distant traffic like an afternoon nap. Here is an eve for every hard crescent unborn, I say with folded hands. Piles of unwashed dishes, heaps of soiled clothes, a disheveled rug. What belongs to us more, our home or our strangers? An intruder can be the imprint of foreign weather, a space I keep ghostly at the side. It is an absence, a trace, something I bring back after peering into unlit alleyways as if they were the sky. At the intruder's house, the light is a small, dirty glow. I stare into the hollow round of a yellowed glass jar until it fills my field of vision. Let us say the moon is a house I have not yet learned. Moon as if it were lover. Let us say she. Let us say hers. Let us say how the body's desire is a longing for home. Or, where do I end and my body underwater begins? She said there is value in knowing our floor, and I understood this to mean that sometimes the ground is a boundary that holds us. We cannot fall any further. I took this to mean the ground is a surface that spreads forever. Attuned to the rifts of daily movement, one cannot help but begin to notice the grime growing underneath the faucet, the paint chips collecting at the hinge of the door. One becomes sensitive to the way morning cloud cover settles in the heart like a body yawning for some onerous distance. A string of good weather brings sun and blue skies, but sometimes I remember the roof is misaligned. To unbuild in order to build, I kept myself empty for something to fill. But in the meantime, a missing doorknob, the splintered chair, weather seeping in through unseen cracks. We remind ourselves how moths navigate. When light is obscured, their bodies are drawn through constellatory fields of magnetic orbit. I move slowly through the house, dragging dust and light. In the morning when I wake, the whales are spread along the beach. In the morning, the whales are swimming inshore and southward, slow and disorganized. The reports say 24 stranded themselves. Outside the bathroom window, a layer of the exterior had peeled and was flapping violently in the wind, a sound I mistook for a bird seeking flight. So I let the ocean grow. Never mind my elusive limbs, my body spread in mass directions. I found a crack and hid inside in order to be cradled, as if to say, weather me. As if I did not know the lull of the tide, I waited for the night to carry all things home. There is fluid in the wings, and I am letting rain collect in forgotten corners. Give me a boat to fill with water, sew into my pocket a parachute of rocks and shells. I wanted the sky unsettled for an expanse in which to immerse. Cover me then with things that sleep, earth-toned habitat, half hemispheres, the eye of a storm. Thank you all.